Taste is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot in conversations about art. And like a lot of those words, it means different things to different people. I mean, sure, we all know what taste is in a general sense. It's something vaguely related to what someone enjoys or doesn't enjoy. But it seems like most people I've asked take a kind of I know it when I see it approach to taste. Oh, they like that book? Bad taste. Or, wow, look at this playlist. This person has great taste. But setting aside this kind of definition by example, how do we define taste in a way that is both consistent and specific? In this video, I want to describe an idea of taste that, well, it's not really a new idea, but it is specific, and I find that it offers pretty satisfactory answers to a lot of the questions and vagaries that surround the subject. The idea is basically that when we're considering a work of art, what we're really doing is comparing it against all the other works we've ever seen or experienced, and we can visualize this as a kind of number line. For example, let's say there's a person who has never seen a movie before in their whole life, but then they finally sit down and watch one. Let's say it's, just picking a random example here, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. And they love it, of course. They've never seen anything like it. Moving pictures, with sounds, and music, and a story and funny jokes. Who wouldn't love it? And they just gotta see more of these movie things. So they watch a couple more. Let's continue this trend of Jim Carrey comedies. But as they watch more, they realize that they might like some of these movies more than others. On a given day, they might feel like popping The Mask into their VCR or something, but much more often they'd rather watch Liar Liar instead. Thinking about it, they could come up with some reasons for these preferences. Maybe the movies they like the most are the ones where Jim Carrey acts the zaniest. Maybe it's the ones with the most interesting concepts. But then let's say they watch something totally different, like The Godfather. And it's nothing like any movie they've ever seen before. Where's the jokes? The zany overacting? Where's Jim Carrey? Isn't he supposed to be in every movie? It's an outlier that doesn't fit neatly within their established paradigm, so how are they supposed to judge it? But then they seek out some similar movies, Goodfellas, Casino, and it becomes easier to sort of figure out what their preferences are for this new kind of movie. And they might figure that they like this new kind of movie more than the old one. Or less, it doesn't really matter. What's important is that now these chunks can be placed on the same number line and compared to each other in relative terms. It's worth repeating that this is all very simplified. The preferences might not be organized in chunks by genre like this, and placing them all on a single static axis excludes a lot of nuance. But the general idea is pretty clear, right? Basically, as our viewer watches more and more movies, they add more data points to their number line. More data points creates a finer resolution, a broader context of experiences within which they can interpret new experiences. The idea is pretty simple, and I find that it provides a pretty intuitive way of looking at the subject of taste. For example, we can look at the stereotype that critics tend to be much harsher, more stuck up, and quicker to call works of art bad than the rest of the population. It's a stereotype so pervasive, they made a whole TV series about it. One explanation I've heard for this phenomenon is that, whereas most people can choose to avoid works that they think they wouldn't enjoy, critics are often assigned to review things that they never would have sought out on their own. While I have no doubt that that's a factor, what about all the other people that aren't professional critics but still have so-called snobbish tastes? I think part of it comes down to different ranges of experience. If we revisit our theoretical person at this point in time, we could say that The Mask is their least favorite movie of all time, but it's also simultaneously their fourth favorite movie of all time. The gap between favorite and least favorite is not very big at all here, because the entire range of their experiences is so small. But as someone accumulates more and more experiences, at what point will they stop saying, I don't like this as much, and start saying, this is bad? When there are 100 movies they would rather watch? 500? 1,000? At what point are there so many other, better ways to spend 2 hours that the value proposition just isn't worth it anymore? I think, as a general rule, as our range expands, so too does the zone that we could call bad. In my last video on Rotten Tomatoes, I had asked how we can distinguish critics from everyone else in this new information age. Sort of implicit in that question is the question of whether the concept of a critic is even relevant anymore. Lots of people have weighed in on this subject over the last 2 decades, including Roger Ebert, who in a 2010 blog post predicted that criticism would soon be something that would no longer provide a living, or as he put it, a profession, but not an occupation. But here's where I'm going to defend critics, or at least the concept of critics. I think that as long as society sees value in supporting some people so that they can spend their time developing their tastes, broadening their range of experiences to the fullest possible degree so that they can report their findings back to the rest of us, that it will continue to do so. If supporting oneself through criticism becomes impossible, I think it will either be because society no longer sees this value, or because the value is provided, in a scenario that Ebert suggests, by an abundance of specialist amateurs who use their limited time and resources to develop their tastes in specific areas. But notice how this whole time I've been talking about developing taste rather than improving taste. That's because under this framework, the only real workable way to define good taste and bad taste would be if there was some kind of universal number line written into the laws of nature or something. Then we could say that the closer an individual's taste is to this cosmic universal benchmark, the better their taste is. This benchmark doesn't exist, of course, but that hasn't stopped some people from looking for it. One popular candidate has been aggregate review scores, including Rotten Tomatoes, which for a while almost seemed to endorse this interpretation by keeping track of how often critics agreed with the Tomatometer scores. Now, even advocates for these aggregate scores will tell you that they're not a true measure of some kind of universal quality. They'll say instead that they're approximations, or the closest thing we have. As I pointed out in my previous video though, even on those terms there are a lot of issues with these scores, but I would also make the argument that a universal number line is not even a worthwhile thing to try to approximate. An approximation of a fantasy is still a fantasy. It doesn't bring it any closer to being an objective or falsifiable truth. So without a master benchmark number line, it would seem that good taste and bad taste aren't really useful concepts. That's why I much prefer to draw a distinction between more developed taste and less developed taste, with each being a descriptor of the breadth of one's experiences. Someone who has seen hundreds of movies will have more developed tastes than our example individual, but all this really means is that they're more in tune with their own likes and dislikes. It doesn't mean they have any more authoritative knowledge on what another person's number line may look like. From this perspective, we can say that cultivating taste is not an exercise in uncovering truth. Rather, it's a process of self-discovery, and as such, yeah, of course different people are going to get different results. I think this is in line with how a lot of people already think about taste, even if they haven't explicitly put it all into words like this. But there are others that think of taste differently, and some people get especially caught up in notions of good taste and bad taste. And when we use the same word to describe different things, it often results in avoidable misunderstandings. That's not something one video can solve, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have, one that maybe we don't have as often as we should. For my part, I'm really partial to the idea that I've explained here. I think it's a pretty common perspective. It's intuitive, it explains a lot of things, and it focuses more on defining the abstract concept of taste rather than getting bogged down in trying to assign value judgments.